Hi, friends. We're dying to know which cities you're listening to us from, so hurry up. Give us a like and write in the comments where you're from. And also share what shocking stories have happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story might just be about your area or even your own personal drama. Subscribe so you don't miss out. And now, let's dive into a new exciting story. I don't know why I started with this with her laugh, which cut through the din of a crowded lecture hall, but it seems right. Maybe because this is where it all began. Elizabeth Marie Harper, the girl with a notebook covered in scribbles and a smile that could melt glaciers, burst into my life. I was 21, a third-year student at Columbia University, buried in books about the American Revolution, and she was a real hurricane of energy, not even suspecting that she would change everything I knew about myself. That's what Liz is. She never planned for the chaos she wrecked. She simply lived, and we all fell into her whirlpool. It was Tuesday, September. I sat in the back row of Professor Hargrove's Fundamentals of Journalism lecture, not because I dreamed of becoming a reporter, but simply because it was the only elective that fit into my schedule. I was going to sit through it quietly, scribble a few notes, and keep my head down. History is what was mine. Dry facts, dusty archives, things where you don't need to communicate with people. But then she came in. The door creaked 5 minutes after Hargrove began his tirade about the ethics of the Watergate scandal, and everyone turned. She stood in the doorway. Her hair was a tangled mop of dark curls, her denim jacket casually slung over her arm, a stack of books about to collapse. But she wasn't embarrassed. She simply smiled, as if she had deliberately arranged such an exit for herself. "Sorry, Professor," she said in a cheerful, not the least bit guilty voice. "Unforeseen circumstances. It won't happen again." Hargrove, a gray old man who probably hadn't smiled since Nixon, adjusted his glasses and sighed. "Sit down, miss." "Harper," she answered, already making her way between the rows. "Elizabeth Harper. Liz, if you want to be friendlier." Some people in the audience chuckled. I don't. I was too busy staring at the way she walked, confident as if she owned the whole room, as if she didn't care that she was late, that her sneakers were scuffed, and that her backpack was taped over a torn seam. She plopped down into an empty seat 2 rows ahead of me, and I caught a slight smell. It seemed like lavender mixed with coffee. It hit me like a bolt, although I couldn't explain why. Hargrove continued to drone on about deep throat and protecting the springs, but I wasn't listening anymore. My gaze caught her every now and then. She opened the notebook, scribbled something, then tore off the paper and handed it to the guy next to him, a lanky, bespectacled guy who looked like he had never talked to girls. He read it, grinned, and wrote something in response. I don't know why this annoyed me, but it's a fact. "Mr. Carter," Hargrove's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "Would you like to retell what I just said?" I blinked, confused. Something about the importance of anonymity in reporting." The audience chuckled. Hargrove pinched the bridge of his nose. "Almost. Listen more carefully." "Yes, sir," I muttered, shrinking in my chair. My face was burning. I glanced at Liz. She turned slightly, just enough to meet my eyes, and smiled as if she knew I was distracted, and she thought it was funny. I quickly turned away, pretending to study my notes. They were a mess of fragments of phrases and scribbles. Great. The lecture ended an hour later, and I was packing up my things when I heard her voice again, closer. "Hey, anonymous guy." I raised my head. She leaned on the desk in front of me, arms crossed, with the same smirk on her face. Up close, she was even more disarming. Brown eyes with golden sparkles, as if she knew some kind of universal secret, freckles on her nose, and a small scar above her left eyebrow. I later learned that this was a mark from a childhood fight with her brother. I asked, pointing at myself like a fool. "Yeah, you." She bowed her head. It was a heroic dash back there. Something about anonymity, worthy of a Pulitzer. I chuckled, even though I didn't want to. "Thank you. I'm usually better at pretending." "Oh, I believe it." She laughed, and the sound like bells on a veranda in summer made me want to hear it again. "I'm Liz." "James," I said, and then added, "Jim, if you want to be friendlier." Her eyebrows shot up. Wow, I give up. So, Jim, what the hell are you doing in journalism? You are not like those who chase sensations. I shrugged, stuffing the notebook into my backpack. We needed an elective. I'm a historian. I thought it would be easy here. A historian, huh? She jumped off the desk and walked next to us as we moved towards the exit. Let me guess, Revolutionary War fan, founding fathers? Is it all freedom or death? Guilty, I said. And you? Journalism. I want to write for the Times, or for Rolling Stone if I decide to rebel. She made a serious grimace. Do you think I can do it? With such an appearance, you've already mastered drama. She laughed again, louder, and something clicked in my chest, like a gear clicking into place. We went out to the square in front of the building, where the sun was breaking through the trees, filling everything with gold. Students rushed here and there, shouting to each other, carrying books, drinking coffee from paper cups. Liz took a pack of gum out of her pocket and handed it to me. Mint, she said. Best taste. Don't argue. I took it and put it in my mouth. I don't argue. So what's your story? Do you always burst into lectures late, or was this a special performance? Only when the gods require a sacrifice, she answered, chewing her gum. I live in the East Village with my neighbor, Sarah. She's a theater goer, all drama. She rehearses monologues at night. Because of her, I sleep in fits and starts. Tough. No, it's fun. Keeps you in good shape. She narrowed her eyes. And you? Where are you from? Queens, I said. Still with my parents. Cheaper than a hostel. Smart. Do you travel every day? Yeah. An hour there, an hour back. There is time to read. She nodded as if impressed. Stubborn. I like it. What are you reading? I hesitated, then pulled out a tattered book 1776 David McCullough from a backpack. This. Third time. Her eyes widened. Okay, you're officially a nerd. This is cute. Cute? I raised an eyebrow. Not what I was aiming for. It's too late, she said, jabbing me with her elbow. Now you can't get away with it. We walked further, past the library, to a coffee stand at the low steps. I don't know how it happened, but we sat on the grass, clutching glasses of warm coffee in our hands, and chatted as if we had known each other for 100 years. She talked about growing up in Connecticut, how her high school English teacher father would read Shakespeare to her before bed, and her mother would bake the best blueberry pie in New England. I talked about my people. My dad is a mechanic. My mom is a nurse, and how I hid in the library from my older brother's stupid friends. So, she said after some time, leaning back on her elbows, what's your big dream, Jim Carter? Famous historian, a professor in tweed with a pipe. I chuckled. Maybe I would agree to teach in a place like this. Digging into the past, figuring out why people act this way and not otherwise. Cool, she said, and I realized that she was serious. And I want to tell stories. Real ones. The kind that makes people think, cry, or throw the newspaper across the room. You can do it, I said, surprised at how confident I sounded. You have a spark. She looked at me, really looked, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something important. But instead, I just smiled slowly, warmly, making my stomach turn. Thank you, Jim, she said quietly. You seem to have a spark, too. We sat until the sun began to set, painting the sky pink and orange. Finally, she looked at her watch and groaned. Damn, there's a shift at the diner in an hour. It's time to run. Where is the diner? I asked, standing up with her. To Amsterdam. Marty's Diner. I deliver potatoes and flirt with truck drivers for tips. I laughed. Sounds like an adventure. This is life. She brushed the grass off her jeans. Come in sometime. I'll steal your coffee for free. Agreed, I said. If it's better than this. I raised my half-empty glass. Without a doubt. She grinned, then hesitated. You attend Hargrove's lectures every week, right? To him. Great. Until next Tuesday, then. Don't fall asleep on the anonymity test. I'll cram like hell, I said with a straight face. She laughed one last time, waved her hand, and ran towards the subway, her curls bouncing with every step. I looked after her, feeling as if I had stumbled upon something that I could not yet name. The coffee got cold, but I didn't care. I sat back on the grass and opened 1776 and tried to read. The letters merged. After that first meeting at Hargrove's lecture, I couldn't get Liz out of my head. Her laugh, her way of talking as if the whole world was a stage, and she was the main actress, her curls, which she kept tucking behind her ear, all this stuck with me, like a melody that you can't stop humming. I wasn't the kind of guy who rushed into love. Rather, on the contrary, careful, thoughtful, accustomed to weighing everything first. But with Liz, there was nothing to weigh. She just was there, and I wanted to be there. That's how it began. We started seeing each other every week at lectures, then started chatting after them, sitting on the campus steps or at the coffee stand. A couple of weeks later, I plucked up the courage to visit her at Marty's. She stood behind the counter in an apron, with a smear of ketchup on her cheek, and shouted, "Jim Carter, you still came for free coffee. Sit down, I'll give you VIP treatment now." The coffee was lousy, but I sat there for 2 hours while she ran between the tables, winking at me every time she passed by. That evening, she finished her shift, and we took our first walk together around the city along Amsterdam Avenue, then through Central Park. She talked about her dream of writing a book, and I talked about how I once found a letter from the Civil War in the library and almost burst into tears with delight. "You're so strange, Jim," she said when we stopped by the pond, "but I like it." "You're crazy," I replied, "and I like it too." She laughed and took my hand. It was the first time I felt her hand in mine warm, slightly rough from the calluses she rubbed while carrying trays in the diner. We didn't kiss that evening, but I already knew that I was lost. By spring, we were inseparable. I finished my third year, Liz finished her second. We spent our days in the library. I crammed history. She wrote articles for the student newspaper. On weekends, we went to Queens to visit my parents or to Connecticut to visit her family. Her father, Mr. Harper, once cornered me with a volume of Shakespeare and made me read Hamlet aloud, and then tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're okay, Jim. Just don't break her heart, or I'll find you with this book." "I'll try, sir," I replied, blushing. Liz's mom baked her famous pies, and Liz and I ate them straight from the pan, sitting on the porch of her old house. She smeared a blueberry on my nose and laughed until I caught her and kissed her for the first time under the old maple tree in the yard. Her lips were sweet from the berries, and I thought that this was probably happiness. But not everything was so smooth. Money was a constant problem. I worked part-time at a bookstore and Liz worked at a diner, but they struggled to make ends meet. One day she lost her wallet on the subway, and we lived for a week on my last $10, eating instant noodles and joking that this was our romantic candlelit dinner, although we had no candles, only a light bulb blinking due to power outages. "We'll get out of it, Jim," she said then, cuddling up to me on the sagging sofa in her rented room. "We always get out." "What if not?" I asked, looking at the ceiling, where the leak stain resembled a map of America. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling in the darkness. "Then we will be poor and happy. The main thing is together." I proposed to her a year after graduation. It wasn't pretentious, no restaurant or diamond ring. I just took her hand on the Brooklyn Bridge, where we liked to walk in the evenings, and said, "Liz, I can't give you the whole world, but I want to give you everything I have. Marry me." She looked at me, then at the river, where the lights of the city were reflected in the water, and laughed. "Jim Carter, you're crazy. Of course I will marry you." I bought a ring later, simple, silver, with the last money from my part-time job. She put it on and said that it was more beautiful than all the diamonds in the world. The wedding took place in the summer, 2 years after we met. Small church in Queens, about 30 guests, tables with paper tablecloths in the basement. My dad got drunk and tried to dance with Liz's mom. Her brother hid my tie, and Liz looked like a dream in the white dress her mom spent all spring making. We were dancing to an old Frank Sinatra song, and she whispered in my ear, "This is just the beginning, Jim. You and I will move more mountains." I believed her. Then I believed everything she said. After our wedding, Liz and I moved to Brooklyn to a tiny apartment on the third floor of an old building, where the stairs creaked like a sick old man and the windows shook with every gust of wind. This was our first real together, not a dorm, not a rented room with neighbors, but our corner, albeit a miserable one. We were 23, had been married for 3 months, and had just enough money to keep us from starving to death. But we were happy, so happy that I still don't understand how this is possible. I remember one evening in November, cold, damp, with the wind sneaking through the cracks and forcing us to wrap ourselves in an old blanket that Liz had stolen from her parents' house. I was sitting at a rickety table we found on the street and dragged home, grading freshman essays for my university internship. They paid me pennies, $10 an hour for grading and bringing coffee to the professors. Liz had just started freelancing for a local newspaper, writing articles about fairs, new cafes, and missing cats for a measly $20 apiece. But she was burning with it, as if it were reports from the front lines. The door slammed, and she stumbled into our so-called kitchen, a corner with a stove, sink, and cabinet that we proudly called the pantry. She was wearing my old sweater, the sleeves dangling like a scarecrow, and there was a pencil in her hair holding her curly bun in place. In her hands is a notebook covered in her sweeping handwriting. "Jim, listen," she said, plopping down on the chair opposite. "I came up with the title, Brooklyn Bagels, Why They're the Best in the World." "So how?" I put down my pen and looked at her. Her eyes sparkled, as they always did when she talked about work. "Sounds like you want to start a war with Manhattan," I said, grinning. "Are you sure you're ready for this? We could be kicked out of the city." "Let them try," she snorted, pointing her pencil in the air. "I will prove that our bagels are art. Listen further. Crispy crust, soft center, light taste of salt. This is not just food, this is poetry. What do you say?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Poetry, you say? Liz, you're turning a bun into Shakespeare. Maybe you'll go straight for the Nobel Prize." She crumpled up a piece of paper from her notebook and threw it at me. It bounced off my forehead, and I pretended it hurt. "Asshole," she said, but she smiled. "It's brilliant, and you know it. What are you scribbling there? Another lecture about Washington and Delaware?" "No," I said, rubbing my forehead for show. "I'm checking my essay. One wise guy wrote that the Boston Tea Party was a cake party. I'm serious." She laughed, throwing her head back, and this sound, ringing, lively, filled our small apartment, drowning out the howling of the wind outside the window. "Oh my God, Jim, this needs to be saved for history." And so the colonists gathered over a cup of tea and cake, and then decided to throw it into the harbor. "Brilliant." "Yeah," I chuckled. "If I don't fix this, Hargrove will fire me. And we already have nothing to pay for electricity." Her laughter died down, and she looked at me more seriously. "How much do we have left?" I sighed and pulled out of my pocket a crumpled check and a couple of crumpled dollars that they had given me today. $43, plus your 20 from the last article. Enough for rent if we don't eat until the end of the month. Liz bit her lip, thought for a second, then stood up and walked over to the cabinet above the sink. I rummaged around there and pulled out a can of beans and half a pack of pasta, the remains of our reserves. "Well," she said, shaking her booty like a trophy, "we will not die of hunger. Today we have a royal dinner, pasta with beans a la Carter." I smiled, even though there was a pain in my chest. "Are you sure you don't want to call your parents? They would feed us pies for the year ahead." She rolled her eyes and poked me in the shoulder with a wooden spoon. "Don't even think about it. We can handle it ourselves, Jim. This is our home, our life. And besides, I'm not going to listen to my mom say every day that I could marry a lawyer." "And she chose a poor historian," I said, catching her hand and pulling her towards me. She plopped down on my lap and hugged my neck. "The best poor historian in the world," she corrected, kissing me on the nose. "Besides, lawyers are boring. And you tell me about battles and revolutions. This is much cooler." I laughed, hugging her to me. She smelled of coffee and a little bit of lavender, the cheap shampoo we bought at a crossroads. "You're crazy, Liz Carter." "And you married me," she retorted, So who's crazy here? We sat like that for about 5 minutes until the wind howled again, reminding us that it was time to prepare this royal dinner of ours. Liz got off me, turned on the stove, an old one, with one working burner, and put on a pot of water. I stood up to help, but she waved me off. Sit down and check your tea and cake. I'm the chef here. A chef with beans from a can, I said. The most elegant beans in Brooklyn, she said, opening the can with a knife, because we didn't have an opener. You will still brag to your friends that your wife cooks like in a restaurant. Friends? Which one? We don't have them because we are poor. She snorted as she dumped the beans into the pot of boiling pasta. Then you will brag to our children. Someday. I froze, looking at her. We didn't talk about children, not seriously, but from her words, a picture flashed in my head. A little girl with Liz's curls and my eyes, running around the house that we would someday be able to afford. For children, right? I asked quietly. She turned around, holding the spoon, and smiled softly, not as usual, but with some depth. Yeah, but not now. First, we need to get out of this hole, and then a whole brood of little Carters. I nodded, feeling the warmth spreading through my chest. Agreed. But they will know that their mother wrote about bagels as about poetry. And Dad confused tea drinking with a party, she added, and we both laughed. Dinner was ready in about 10 minutes, a sticky mess of pasta and beans, which we ate straight from the pan, sitting on the floor, because we only had 2 chairs, and one was already wobbly. Liz scooped up a portion with a spoon and brought it to my mouth. Open up, Your Majesty. First tasting. I obediently opened my mouth, swallowed, and nodded. Not bad. 4 stars out of 5. The cook lives. 4. She was indignant, poking me in the side. This is a masterpiece, Jim. 5 stars and applause. Okay, 5, I conceded, but only because you are beautiful. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Underlying. We ate in silence for a while, listening to the wind knocking on the window, and somewhere upstairs, a neighbor turned on the TV another news broadcast about the economy, which did not concern us. Then Liz put her spoon down and looked at me. You know, Jim, I'm happy. Me too. We'll get through it, Liz. I promise. She nodded and pressed her shoulder against me. We'll get out together. And we got out not right away, not easily, but we got out. But that evening with cold, laughter, and beans stayed with me forever. This was our beginning, our we, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. When Sophie was born, I realized what a real miracle was. It was in May, 4 years after our wedding, when we had already moved from that crummy apartment in Brooklyn to a slightly more decent place in Queens, still rented, but with windows that kept the wind out and a bed, not just a mattress on the floor. By that time, I had received a permanent job as an assistant professor at Columbia University, and Liz got a job as a staff journalist at a small newspaper, where she finally wrote not only about bagels, but also about city events. Money was still tight, but we managed. And then she appeared, our Sophie. I remember that day in the hospital. Liz, tired but radiant, held her in her arms, and I stood next to her, afraid to breathe, so as not to scare away this moment. Sophie was tiny, just over 5 pounds, with dark curls like Liz's and my gray eyes. Liz looked at me, smiled, and said, "Well, Jim, you're officially a dad now. Don't screw it up." I laughed, even though everything inside was trembling. We'll try. The first years with Sophie were like a dream, a chaotic, beautiful dream. She grew quickly, learned to crawl on our threadbare carpet, laughed when I tossed her into the air, and screamed if Liz took too long with dinner. We were a family, real, noisy, alive. Liz called her our little hurricane, and I just looked at them both and thought that this is all there is to live for. But then the shadow came. Sophie was 5 when we noticed something was wrong. She began to get tired, not just falling asleep after playing, but collapsing from weakness in the middle of the day. Her skin turned pale, dark circles appeared under her eyes, and one day I found a bruise on her leg, large, dark, although she swore that she had not fallen. Liz was the first to say it out loud, sitting in the kitchen late at night when Sophie was already asleep. "Jim," her voice trembled, This is not normal. She needs to see a doctor. I nodded, even though everything inside me sank. Maybe just anemia. My mother said this happened to me as a child. Maybe, she said, but I saw fear in her eyes. But I don't want to guess. We'll take her tomorrow. We took it. The doctor at the local clinic looked at her, touched the lymph nodes, frowned, and sent us for tests. 3 days later, we were called to the hospital, not to our clinic, but to the Children's Oncology Center in Manhattan. I remember how we sat in the office, holding hands, while the doctor, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, said words that I still hear in my dreams. Sophie has lymphoblastic leukemia. This is blood cancer, but we will start treatment immediately. The children have a good chance. Liz squeezed my hands so hard that her nails dug into my skin. I looked at the doctor, trying to comprehend. Chances? I asked again. What are the chances? About 80% for full recovery, he said, if everything goes according to plan. But it will be hard. Chemotherapy, drugs, hospitals. Are you ready? I wanted to say yes, but my throat tightened. Liz answered for both of us. We will do whatever it takes. All. At home, we sat on the sofa, silently, while Sophie played in her room with her dolls. Liz suddenly turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was firm. Jim, she won't die. Do you hear? We'll get her out. We'll get her out, I said, hugging her. Together. And all hell broke loose. Chemotherapy hit Sophie like a hammer. Her hair, those beautiful curls, fell out within a couple of weeks. She cried, looking in the mirror, and asked, Dad, am I ugly now? I took her in my arms and pressed her to me. You are the most beautiful girl in the world, Sophie. With or without hair, and they will grow again, I promise. Liz sat next to her, stroked her back, and sang some stupid song about bald princesses that she came up with on the fly. Sophie giggled, and it was the first time in a week that we all smiled. Money became a problem again. My salary went toward rent, insurance didn't cover everything, and Liz had to leave her job at the newspaper to be with Sophie in the hospital. We sold the car, an old wreck that I fixed every weekend, and took on debt. My mother came over once a week with pans of food, and Liz's father silently handed me a check for $1,000, saying, Don't argue, Jim. This is for the baby. One night, after another round of chemo, I found Liz in Sophie's hospital room. She sat by the crib, held her little hand, and cried quietly, so as not to wake her. I walked up and hugged her from behind. Hey, I whispered, we can handle it. What if not? Her voice broke. What if we lose her, Jim? I swallowed the lump in my throat. We won't lose. She's strong. How are you? She turned and buried her face in my chest. I'm not strong. I'm just pretending. Then we're both pretending, I said. The main thing is that it works. 2 years of hospitals, Eve's nights without sleep, when Liz and I took turns watching Sophie, reading her fairy tales, joking about how she would become a superhero with a bald head. And she fought our little Sophie, so fragile, but so stubborn. The doctors said that she was doing great, that her numbers were improving, but every time we waited for test results, I felt my heart stop. One day, at the end of the 2nd year, the doctor called us into his office. Sophie was sitting on Liz's lap, wearing a funny hat with ears that my mother had knitted. He smiled for the first time ever and said, Remission. Full. She did it. Liz screamed and hugged Sophie to her, and I just sat there looking at them and trying not to burst into tears. Sophie looked at me and said, Dad, am I healthy now? Yes, baby, I managed. The healthiest. We had a party at home with pizza, which we ordered with our last money, and music from an old radio. Liz danced around the living room with Sophie, and I looked at them and thought we had been through hell and back. We were together, exhausted, but whole, and I believed that now everything would be fine. When Sophie was declared in remission, I exhaled for the first time in 2 years. It wasn't just relief, it was as if someone had opened a window in the room where we had been suffocating for too long. She was 7, Liz and I were 29, and we looked like we had lived twice that long. Hospitals, debt, endless nights at her crib, all these left traces. The wrinkles around Liz's eyes, the gray hair in my hair, which she teased, calling me a professor before my time. But we survived, and now we had a chance to start again. The first months after the hospital were strange. Sophie returned home, but Liz and I were still wincing at her every cough, every "I'm tired." She was weak, thin, with short curls that were just starting to grow back, but her eyes sparkled again. She drew pictures bright, with the sun and flowers, and hung them throughout the apartment. One day I came home from work, and she ran up to me with a piece of paper where I was drawn in a hat, Liz with a notebook, and herself flying with wings. "It's us, Dad," she said, jumping up and down. "I'm a superhero now because I beat cancer." I picked her up and spun her around. "The coolest superhero, Sophie Carter. Even Batman is jealous of you." Liz looked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Batman. Jim, don't set the bar too high. At least she's Wonder Woman." "Wonder Woman," Sophie shouted, and we all laughed. Life was slowly getting better. I received a promotion from assistant to junior lecturer at the university. Salaries have increased, not God knows how much, but enough so that we can pay off some of the debts and stop counting every cent. Liz returned to work first as a freelancer, and then she was taken back to the newspaper with a promise of a chance at bigger materials. She came home with sparkling eyes, talked about her ideas, and I listened as before when we were just starting out. One evening, she rushed into the apartment, threw her bag on the sofa, and shouted, "Jim, guess what? I'm being sent to an interview with the mayor." I looked out of the room where I was giving my lectures. "Seriously? With de Blasio himself?" "Yeah," she jumped up like a girl. "Tomorrow at the city hall, I will write such an article that they will all be stunned. This is my ticket to the Times, I feel it." I stood up and hugged her. "You deserve it, Liz. Show them all." She kissed me on the cheek. "And you prepare your lectures, Professor. We need to get out among the people." "I'm already working on it," I said, patting the stack of papers. "Soon I will teach a course about the Civil War. A hall full of students if they don't fall asleep." "They won't sleep," she said. "You know how to tell. I don't sleep when you talk about your battles." It was true. Liz always loved it when I told her stories not from books, but those that I myself found in the archives. About soldiers who wrote letters home before they died, about women who sewed flags from old dresses. She said that I make the past alive, and I believed her. A year later, we were able to move. Not to a mansion, of course, but to a house in the suburbs of Queens with a small garden where Sophie could play and a kitchen where Liz had finally installed a proper stove. We bought it with a mortgage, and on moving day, I was carrying boxes, and Liz stood on the porch with Sophie in her arms and screamed, "Jim, this is our home, a real home." I put the box on the grass and wiped the sweat from my forehead.
Yeah.
"Now we just need a white fence, and we'll be like in the movies." "And a dog," Sophie added. "Can I have a dog, Dad?" "We'll see, baby," I said. "First, let's sort out the boxes." "And we'll buy you a hat like the one in the picture," Liz said, and we laughed again. That night, after Sophie fell asleep in her new room, Liz and I sat on the floor in the living room. There was no furniture yet, just an old rug and a bottle of cheap wine that she had brought for a housewarming party. We clinked plastic cups, and she said, "You know, Jim, I thought we wouldn't get out. After everything with Sophie, I was afraid that we would break." I took her hand and squeezed it. "We didn't break. We are stronger than we think." "You are stronger," she said quietly. "You kept us together." "No," I objected. "It's you. You didn't give up, Liz, even when I wanted to." She smiled and snuggled up to me. Then both of us, Carter's team. "Team Carter," I repeated, and we drank. Life has become easier. Sophie went to school, a regular one, not a hospital one, with a school bag and friends. Her hair had grown out, curly and thick, like Liz's, and she showed it off to everyone. Liz wrote that article about the mayor, and she got noticed a couple of months later. She was offered a column in the newspaper, and then they started talking about the Times. I taught my course at the university, and the students really didn't sleep. They even asked questions, which was like a medal for me. One spring, we went to Lake Tahoe, the first trip in years, just the three of us, without doctors and ifs. Sophie was splashing in the water, Liz was sunbathing on the shore, and I was sitting with a book, but not reading, I was looking at them. Liz caught my eye and smiled. "What are you thinking about, Professor?" "That we did it," I said. "We got out." "Yeah," she nodded. "And now we have everything." "Well, almost. We haven't gotten a dog yet." "Sophie won't forget," I laughed. "Never," she said, and lay down next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. "But you know what? I'm happy, Jim. For real." "Me too," I answered, and it was the truth. That light at the end of the tunnel that everyone talks about, it was real. We found it in Sophie's laughter, in Liz's new chances, in my lectures, in our home. By the time Sophie was 10, our lives had finally settled into a groove not ideal, but normal. Liz and I found a rhythm where we could breathe, laugh, and just be together. I taught at the university, lectured on the Civil War, and even began writing a book slowly at night, when everyone was asleep. Liz worked at the newspaper, her column became popular, and she increasingly talked about moving to the New York Times. Sophie grew up healthy, noisy, with shoulder-length curls and a habit of asking a million questions a minute. And we had traditions, small ones, ours, that held us together like glue. One of my favorites was Friday night dinners. It started by accident. After another week of running around, we decided that Friday was our day when no one worked, did not grade essays, and did not write articles. Just the three of us, the kitchen, and something simple but tasty. Usually it was pizza homemade because Liz insisted that we make our own dough, although our first attempts were more like rubber. I remember one such evening, a rainy autumn evening, when the leaves outside the window of our house in Queens stuck to the glass. Sophie sat on the counter, legs dangling, while I rolled out the dough. Liz stood at the stove, stirring the sauce and humming some old Sinatra song she always sang when she cooked, even if she mixed up the words. "Dad, why don't you make the dough round?" Sophie asked, poking her finger at my uneven cake. "It looks like a map of America." "Because I'm a historian, not a baker," I said, feigning a frown. "And then, this is not a map. This is an artistic style." Liz turned around, looked at my masterpiece, and laughed. "Jim, this is not style. This is a disaster. Give it here." She took the rolling pin from me and began straightening the dough until it was almost a perfect circle. "That's why you're the boss," I said, stepping back with a bow. "And I'll stay in support." "Pickup is a generous word," she said. "Sophie, tell Daddy that he cuts cheese better than anyone else." Sophie jumped off the table, grabbed a piece of mozzarella, and shoved it into my hands. "Dad, you are a cheese champion. Just don't eat half like last time." "It was a strategic tasting," I said, slicing the cheese and sneaking a piece into my mouth. Liz caught my eye and shook her head, but smiled. While the pizza was baking, we would turn on some music, usually something old like "Fly Me to the Moon," and dance in the kitchen. Sophie jumped between us, Liz spun her around, and I pretended that I knew how to lead, although I always stepped on her feet. That evening she grabbed my hands and said, "Jim, you're dancing like General Lee on the battlefield, a lot of noise and no plan. And you, as a reporter on the front page, have everything under control," I answered, and we spun until Sophie screamed. "The pizza is on fire." We rushed to the oven, pulled out the lightly toasted circle, and decided it had a special crunch. We ate on the couch with paper plates, laughed at the sauce stains on Sophie's shirt, and argued who did the best job, me with the cheese, Liz with the dough, or Sophie with the eating. Another tradition was trips to Lake Tahoe. We went there every summer, rented a small house by the water, not luxurious, but cozy, with a veranda and a creaky bed. This was our place where time stood still. Sophie splashed in the lake, Liz read her drafts out loud, and I sat with a fishing rod, although I had never caught anything. One day, in August, we made a fire on the shore. Sophie was roasting marshmallows, Liz was warming her hands by the fire, and I looked at them and thought how lucky we were. Liz caught my eye and asked, "What are you thinking about, Professor?" "That this is the best I have," I said. "You, Sophie, this fire." She smiled and moved closer. Be careful not to jinx it. Otherwise, tomorrow it will rain, and you will whine that the fishing rod got wet in vain. I'm not whining, I objected. I philosophize about the weather. Philosophize silently, she said, and handed me a marshmallow on a stick. Eat before Sophie eats it all. Sophie ran up with sticky hands and a happy face. Dad, tell me about the war, about the one where the soldiers were hiding in the forest. I started talking about the partisans of the Civil War, how they set up ambushes and lived in the forests, and Liz listened with her chin propped up and interjected her jokes. Just like you with a fishing rod, you sit, wait, and the fish laughs. Sophie giggled, and I pretended to be offended until we collapsed on the grass, looking at the stars. Liz whispered to me, "This is happiness, Jim. These are the moments." Yeah, I nodded, and we have plenty of them. Another fun thing to do, Liz read her articles to me before sending them to the editor. She came home with sheets of paper covered in her handwriting, sat down on the sofa, and said, "Jim, be my first reader, only honestly." One day, she brought a column about New York street musicians, how they play in the subway to survive. I listened while she read, her voice trembling with emotion, and when she finished, I asked, "Is this for the Times?" "Not yet," she said, "but I want it to go there." "Do you think it's good?" "Is it good?" "Liz, that's fucking cool," I said. "They're fools if they don't take you." She smiled and curled up next to me. "Thank you, Jim. You are my biggest fan." "Always," I answered and kissed her on the top of her head. These traditions, dinners, trips, reading her were our anchors. They reminded us of who we were, even when work dragged on, when Sophie got a bad grade in math, and I argued with colleagues about course funding. Liz and I could get tired, we could grumble at each other about little things, but at these moments everything receded. I looked at her curls, which she still tucked behind her ear, at her laugh, which had not changed since college, and thought that this would be forever. 20 years together sounds like a lifetime, and it probably was. By the time Liz and I reached that milestone, I was 44, she was 42, and Sophie was already 15, a teenager with a temper, shoulder-length curls, and a habit of rolling her eyes at everything we said. I became a professor at Columbia University, not just an assistant professor, but with a real office and a sign on the door. Liz had finally made it to the New York Times. Her columns were read all over the city, and she beamed with pride every time she saw her name in print. We still lived in that house in Queens, but now with a new fence and a dog, a Labrador named Max, that Sophie begged for her 13th birthday. And so, in July, we decided to celebrate our 20th anniversary, not magnificently, but in a way that would be memorable. I thought of giving her a gift, something special. I saved for a long time, saving from each salary until I bought a designer handbag, black, leather, with thin gold details. Liz had always loved such things, although she rarely allowed herself to do them. She would say, "Jim, I'm a journalist, not a socialite," but I could see her eyes light up as she leafed through fashion magazines. I hid my purse in the closet, behind some old jackets, and waited for the day. The morning of the anniversary began with Sophie, who flew into our bedroom with a tray on it were crooked pancakes, coffee, and a note. "Happy 20th anniversary, old people, don't quarrel." Liz laughed and patted her on the head, and I pretended to be offended. "Old people? Sophie, I'm in my prime." "Yeah," she snorted. "Is that why you moan when you get up from the couch?" "These are battle wounds," I said with a wink. "Ask Mom, she will confirm." Liz patted me on the shoulder. "Don't drag me into this, Jim. Eat your pancakes while they're warm." We ate in bed, laughing as Sophie flooded the kitchen with syrup in an attempt to surprise us. Then she ran away to her friend, and Liz and I were left alone. I pulled out the box with my purse and handed it to her. "Happy anniversary, Liz." She froze, looked at me, then at the box. "Jim, are you crazy? This is—" "Open it," I said. "Don't argue." She untied the ribbon, lifted the lid, and gasped. "Oh God, Jim, this is too much. How much did you pay for it?" "It doesn't matter," I said. "You deserve it. 20 years with me is a feat." She laughed, but her eyes were wet. "You're a fool, Jim Carter. the best fool. She hugged me, pressed me so tightly that I felt her heartbeat. Then she pulled away, took her purse, and hung it on her shoulder, spinning in front of the mirror. Well, how? Am I a Times star now, or what? You've always been a star, I said, and now you also look like one. In the evening, we had dinner not at home, but at a small Italian restaurant in Manhattan, where we went in our youth, when we could afford it once a year. Sophie was staying with a friend, so it was our evening. We ordered pasta and wine, and Liz raised her glass. For us, Jim, for 20 years good, bad, and everything in between. For us, I nodded. And for the fact that you still tolerate my lectures. And you are my articles, she said, and we clinked glasses. After dinner, it began to rain warm, summer rain, with the smell of wet asphalt. We left the restaurant, and Liz suddenly grabbed my hand. Let's dance. Here, I looked back. In the rain? Yeah, she said. Like in the movies. Come on, Jim, don't be a bore. I laughed, and we spun right on the street, under the streetlights. She pressed herself against me. Her hair was wet, drops were running down her face, but she was smiling the same smile that I saw on the first day of college. I whispered to her, "You're still that girl who was late for the lecture." "And you're still that guy who didn't know about anonymity," she replied, and we laughed like teenagers. The rain got heavier, but we didn't care. We danced clumsily, advancing on each other's feet until a passerby shouted, "Hey, find a room." Liz stuck her tongue out at him, and I pulled her towards the car. At home, we changed into dry clothes, wrapped ourselves in a blanket, and sat on the sofa with hot tea. She laid her head on my shoulder. Her purse stood next to me, black, shiny, as a symbol of everything we had gone through. "Jim," she said quietly, "those were the best 20 years. Even with hospitals, debts, and your stupid jokes. And with your bagels," I added. "But yes, the best, and there's even more to come." She nodded and squeezed my hand. "We're great, right?" "Well done," I said. Teen Carter. When Liz finally established herself at the New York Times, I realized that she had rocketed into an orbit that was not always easy for me to reach. She was 43, I was 45, and our lives in Queens went on as usual. I lectured, Sophie finished school, Max barked at the neighbor's cats. But Liz was now not just a journalist, she became something more. Her columns were read on the subway and in cafes, she was invited to talk shows, and one day I even heard two students on campus arguing about her article about Broadway actors. I was proud of her hell. I was thrilled, but sometimes I felt like she was going where the light was brighter. It all started with her new position editor of the culture department. It was a leap. More responsibility, more events, more meetings with people whose names I only knew from the headlines. She came home late, with a sparkle in her eyes, talking about premieres, galas, and interviews with some celebrities I could barely remember. I listened, nodded, joked, but sometimes I caught myself thinking that I didn't quite understand her new world. One evening, it was March, cold and windy, she rushed into the house with the very purse I gave her for her 20th anniversary and an armful of papers. Sophie was visiting a friend. I was sitting at the table with a mug of tea and a stack of student papers. Liz threw her bag on the sofa and shouted, "Jim, you won't believe it. I'm being sent to Los Angeles for a film festival." I put down my pen and looked at her. "Seriously? Is it the one with everyone in tuxedos and drinking champagne?" "Yeah," she said, plopping down next to him. "A week on the coast, red carpets, directors, actors. I'll be interviewing Daniel Ellington, you know, that guy from City of Love, Oscar nomination last year." I nodded, although the name meant nothing to me. "Sounds like a big deal. When are you going?" "In a week," she said. "Everything is paid for by the editors. Hotel, flight, even the dress was promised to be adjusted. Jim, this is my chance to write something that will be noticed outside of New York." I smiled, at least something stirred inside, not jealousy. No, rather the feeling that she was moving forward and I was standing still. "You'll tear them apart, Liz, as always." She hugged me. "Thank you, Jim. You are my talisman, you know. And you are my star," I said, and it was true. The next few days she got ready. She ran around the shops, chose a dress black with an open back, which I approved with a joke. Liz, are you sure this is for an interview and not for running away with this Reynolds guy? She laughed and poked me with her elbow. Jim, he's handsome, but I'm married to the best professor in the world. He has no chance. It's good that you reminded me, I said, and we both giggled. While she was busy, I stayed at home with Sophie. She and I made dinners not like our Friday pizzas, but something simpler, like macaroni and cheese. Sophie, of course, grumbled. Dad, why is Mom always somewhere? She's never there. It's working, Sophie, I said, stirring the sauce. This is her dream. Remember how she wrote about bagels? Now she writes about big shots. The bagels were cooler, she muttered, but then smiled. Aren't you bored? I miss you, I admitted, but I'm proud of her. And then I have you and Max. Max is licking the floor, she said, and we laughed. When Liz flew to Los Angeles, the house became quieter. I gave lectures, graded essays, and took Sophie to volleyball practice. Liz called every evening and told about the festival. Jim, it's like this. Yesterday I saw Spielberg, and today Daniel joked that I was asking too smart questions. By the way, he is cute, but a little arrogant. The main thing is don't take an autograph, I faked. Otherwise, I'll start to be jealous. Oh, Jim, you're too cute to be jealous, she said, and I heard her smile through the phone. She returned a week later with a suitcase full of stories and a draft of an article. We sat in the kitchen, Sophie was already asleep, and Liz read aloud to me about the brilliance of Hollywood, about Daniel, who talked about his film with such passion that she almost believed in its genius. I listened, nodded, and then said, Liz, this is amazing. She looked at me and smiled. Thank you, Jim. But you know, I'm glad to be home. It's all fun, but you and Sophie are my real world. I thought it was Max, I said, and she laughed, throwing a napkin at me. But I noticed changes. She increasingly went to events not as big as the festival, but regular. Premieres in New York, dinners with colleagues, meetings with some producers. She brought home programs, tickets, sometimes even flowers, which were given to her for her brilliant questions. I wasn't jealous, I trusted her, as I always did. She was my Liz. One night, after another premiere, she came home late, tired but happy. I was waiting for her with tea, and she said, Jim, sometimes I feel out of place there. All these people are so loud, and I just want to write. You write better than anyone, I said, and you're right there, Liz. This is your orbit. She smiled and snuggled up to me. And you are my gravity. Don't let me fly too far. Always, I said, and kissed her. While Liz was in Los Angeles for that film festival, I kept our little world afloat in Queens. She was 43, I was 45, Sophie was 16, and a week without Liz was a test for my daughter and me. I was used to Liz being our center, the one who set the rhythm. She reminded Sophie of her workouts, cooked dinner, even if it was just pasta, and always knew where my reading glasses were. The house seemed quieter without her. It was Wednesday, the middle of her trip. I sat in the living room, grading the students' essays, another stack of papers about the Battle of Gettysburg, half of which had the dates mixed up. Sophie was lying on the sofa with her phone. Max was sleeping at her feet, snoring like an old grandfather. It was drizzling outside, and I thought that in Los Angeles, perhaps, the sun and palm trees are a completely different world. Dad, Sophie said, without looking up from the screen, when will Mom be back? On Saturday, I answered, highlighting someone's mistake with a red pen. 3 more days. Are you bored? Nope, she muttered, but then added, well, maybe a little. She promised to bring me a t-shirt from the festival. I smiled. She'll bring it. And probably a lot of stories about these Hollywood bigwigs. About Daniel? Sophie looked up. He's cool. Have you seen his latest film? Where is he with the gun on the bridge? I didn't see it, I said. I'm more into books than films. But Mom says he's a star. Of course, Sophie nodded. All the girls at school are crazy about him. I chuckled. I hope Mom doesn't leave. Otherwise, I'll have to fight him. Sophie rolled her eyes. Dad, you'll lose. He's like a jock. But I have brains, I said, tapping my head with a pen. This weapon is stronger. She snorted, but smiled, and I felt like we were getting along with her. We cooked dinner together, frozen nuggets and fries, nothing fancy, but Sophie said, "Better than your pasta, Dad." "Is this a compliment?" I asked, putting the plates on the table. "Almost," she answered, and we laughed. Liz called late, around 10 in the evening our time. It was 7. I took the phone and settled on the couch, while Sophie went to her room to listen to music. "Hello, Star," I said, hearing her voice. "Hello, Professor," she replied. Her voice was a little tired, but pleased. "How are you and Sophie doing?" "We'll survive," I said. "Nuggets instead of pizza, but no one is complaining." "And you? How's the festival?" "Crazy," she said. "Today there was a big reception after the show. Daniel gave an interview, Jim. He's so charismatic. You ask him a question, and he looks at you as if you are the only person in the room." I chuckled. "Be careful, Liz. Sophie says he's a jock. Make sure he doesn't take you away." She laughed loudly, like before. "Jim, you are my only Musliman, but he's really interesting. He talked about his film, how they filmed it in the desert, how he almost got burned in the sun. I wrote everything down. It will be a great article." "I have no doubt," I said. "You're shining there, aren't you?" "I'm trying," she replied, "but I'm tired. These parties are not my thing. Champagne, talking about nothing. I would rather sit at home with you and tea." "You'll be there soon," I said. 3 days, and you are back in our boring reality." "Your reality is not boring," she objected. "I miss you. By Sophie, by Max, even by your stupid jokes." "My jokes are art," I said. "Say hi to Daniel from your professor." "Definitely," she said, and I heard a smile in her voice. "Good night, Jim. Love you." "And I you," I answered. "Good night." Amjendra's phone came to life, feeling warmth in his chest. She was there, in her own shining world, but still my Liz, the one who read my articles, danced in the rain, laughed at my lectures. After the call, I went to check on Sophie. She was sleeping, her headphones were lying on the pillow, and Max was curled up at her feet. I turned off the light, went back into the living room, and opened the book, an old biography of Lincoln that I was reading for the 3rd time. The rain was pattering on the roof, and I thought that Liz was probably looking at the stars in Los Angeles right now, happy with her work. I was calm. She would return, tell her stories, and we would be together again, as always. The next day, she didn't call. I decided that she was busy, the festival, the interview, all that. I wrote her a message. "How are you, Star? Sophie is waiting for a t-shirt." She answered later in the evening. "Everything is fine. I'm just tired. I'll be home soon. Kiss." I didn't notice anything strange. She was tired. That's normal. I didn't see her thoughtfulness. I didn't hear the slight trembling in her voice when she called the day before. I just lived my life, waited for her to return, and believed that everything was okay. That night, unbeknownst to me, nothing changed for me. Liz was my wife, my team, and I never doubted her for a second. It was just another night, that's what I thought. Liz returned from Los Angeles on Saturday, as promised. I met her at the airport with Sophie. She brought a t-shirt with the festival logo for my daughter and a bottle of California wine for me, which we drank at dinner, laughing at her stories about Hollywood parties. She looked tired but happy, and I didn't notice anything strange, not in her smile, not in the way she hugged me, not in the way she stroked Sophie's head. I trusted her, as I always had, and thought that her journey was just another chapter of her success. But a week later, everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, late March. I was sitting in my office at the university, between lectures, scrolling through the news on my laptop, a common thing to take my mind off student essays. Sophie was at school. Liz went to the Times office for a morning meeting. I clicked on the headlines: politics, weather, some kind of election scandal. And then I came across a gossip section. Not that I was looking for it, it's just that the site itself slipped me a link. Stars at the Los Angeles Film Festival. Who was secluded with whom? I chuckled. It was some kind of nonsense, but I clicked out of curiosity. The article was a typical tabloid. Photos of celebrities with glasses, rumors of affairs, nothing serious. And then I saw him, Daniel Ellington, the same actor Liz was talking about. Tall, with dark hair and a smile that probably drove all the girls, including Sophie, crazy. In the photo, he was leaving the hotel, a black jacket, a casually unbuttoned shirt, and next to him was a woman. Her face was hidden. She turned her back to the camera, but I froze. There was a purse hanging on her shoulder. Black, leather, with gold details. The one I gave Liz for our 20th anniversary. My heart sank. I leaned closer to the screen, peering. The handbag wasn't just similar, it was it. I myself chose it in the store. I hid it in the closet. I myself saw how it shone when I opened the box. In the photo with Daniel Ellington at 3 in the morning outside a hotel in Los Angeles. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. No, I thought, this is a mistake. Maybe someone else bought the same one. Maybe it's a coincidence. But her words were already spinning in my head. He's charismatic, Jim. Looks as if you're the only one in the room. And that evening when she didn't call, and her thoughtfulness when she returned, I chalked it up to fatigue. But now, I slammed the laptop shut as if that would erase the image from my memory. He got up and walked around the office, small, littered with books and papers. Outside the window, students were chatting and laughing, and I stood and looked at my hand. It was shaking. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. Liz by Liz, the one who danced with me in the rain, who held Sophie's hand in the hospital, couldn't. I drove home in silence. Sophie was at training. Liz was still in the editorial office. When Liz returned, I was in the kitchen making coffee, just to keep my hands busy. She came in, threw her bag on a chair, and said, "Hello, Jim." It was a hard day. I could barely sit through this planning meeting. I nodded without looking at her. "Yes. How's Los Angeles? Still remember?" She hesitated, or was it just me? And answered, "Yes, it was cool. The article about Ellington is almost ready. The editor is delighted." "Ellington," I repeated, turning to her. My voice was level, but everything was boiling inside. "Nice guy, huh?" She smiled, a little nervously, but I could be wrong. "Well, yes, charismatic. I told you so. Why are you asking?" I looked at her curls, at her eyes, which I had known for 20 years. I wanted to ask directly, "Was that you in the photo?" But I couldn't. Instead, he said, "Just like that. Sophie was chatting about him, so I remembered." "Oh, she's a fan," Liz said, relaxing. "We need to show her his film." "We should," I nodded and turned to the coffee maker. She left and into the shower, and I remained standing, clutching my mug. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe it, but the handbag in the frame couldn't leave my mind. It was not just a thing, it was a symbol, my gift, our history. And now she stood between us, like a crack that I could not yet see in its entirety. I didn't ask her that night. Didn't shout, didn't make a scene. I was just drinking coffee and thinking, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's not her. But deep down I already knew. After that photo with the purse, I didn't sleep for 2 days. I looked at Liz, her smile, the way she poured coffee in the morning, the way she stroked Max's head, and I couldn't get that damn photograph out of my head. Daniel Ellington Hotel, 3 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to be wrong, I wanted to find an explanation, but the longer I was silent, the louder the questions became in my head, and I knew I had to ask. This happened on Thursday evening. Sophie went to spend the night with a friend. Max dozed in the corner, and a light rain fell outside the window, knocking on the glass like my thoughts. Liz was sitting on the couch with her laptop, typing something, probably another column. I was standing in the kitchen, washing the dishes, but my hands were shaking, and at some point the plate slipped out, clanking on the sink. Liz raised her head. "Jim, are you okay?" she asked, putting down her laptop. "You've been kind of quiet all day." I dried my hands with a towel and turned to her. My voice was calm, but everything was burning inside. "Liz, can I talk?" She frowned but nodded. "Certainly. What's happened?" I walked over and sat down opposite her on the chair. The handbag, the same one, stood on the shelf at the entrance, as if it was looking at me. I swallowed and gathered my strength. This is about your trip to Los Angeles. About the festival. She hesitated, her fingers frozen on the armrest of the sofa. What's wrong with her? I told you everything. The article came out, the editor liked it. I saw the photo, I interrupted, looking into her eyes. On the internet. Daniel Ellington, hotel, 3 o'clock in the morning. And the woman with him. Her face turned pale. She opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. She just looked at me as if time had stopped. I waited, hoping that she would laugh and say that it was a mistake, that the purse was a coincidence. But the silence was louder than words. Liz, I said quietly, was that you? She lowered her gaze and clenched her hands into fists. The silence lasted for seconds, but seemed like an eternity. Finally, she raised her eyes, wet and full of guilt. Yes, she whispered. It was me. I felt the floor disappear from under my feet. Not a cry, not tears, just an emptiness that filled everything inside. I nodded as if this was an answer to a lecture question and not a blow to 20 years of our lives. What happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She swallowed, her voice shaking. It was one night, Jim, after the reception. Too much champagne, too much talking. He was charming, and I was tired. It was stupid, spontaneous. I didn't want it to happen like this. I didn't want to, I repeated, looking at her. But it worked out. She covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders trembled. Jim, I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain it. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I love you. I have always loved you. I got up and walked around the room. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. Instead, I stood at the window, looking at the rain. Do you understand what you did? I said without turning around. It's not just a night, Liz. This is trust, everything we had. I know, her voice broke. Jim, forgive me. Please. I will do everything to fix this. I turned to her. She cried, but not theatrically, quietly, as if the pain was flowing out of her drop by drop. I looked at her, my Liz, my wife, my team, and I didn't recognize her. To correct, I said, how will you fix this? She stood up and stepped towards me, but I raised my hand, stopping her. Don't, Liz. Just tell me the truth. Was this just one time? Yes, she said quickly. Once. There was nothing else, I swear. I didn't even see him after. I nodded, although it didn't help. Once or 100, what's the difference? She destroyed something that I spent 20 years building. I walked past her and took the jacket from the hanger. I need to think, I said. I can't be here now. Jim, her voice was full of panic. Don't go. Let's talk, please. We talked, I said, opening the door. You told the truth. Now, man, I live with her. I walked out into the rain without looking back. She didn't scream, didn't run after me. She just stood in the doorway. I felt her gaze. I walked down the street, wet to the skin, and thought about how simple everything was just a week ago. Liz, Sophie, our home is my life. The truth came out without words, without screams, but it cut me in half. I didn't know what to do next. But he knew that there was no turning back. After that conversation, I did not return home until the morning. Our world, which I considered indestructible, fell apart overnight. I wandered the streets of Queens, wet and empty-headed, until I arrived at a 24-hour diner. I sat there with a cold cup of coffee, looked at the neon sign and thought, how did we get to this? 20 years wedding, Sophie, hospitals, laughter, traditions, and everything collapsed because of one night with some Daniel Ellington. But it wasn't about him. It was about her. In us. I returned home at dawn. Liz was asleep on the couch, curled up under the covers, her face swollen from crying. I walked past, quietly so as not to wake up, took clean clothes, and went to the university. I lectured on autopilot all day. Students asked something, I answered, but didn't hear a word. One thing was spinning in my head. I can't live like this. Not with this. By evening, I decided. Divorce. It wasn't because I hated her, I still loved her, and that was the worst part. But because trust is such a thing, it either exists or it doesn't, and I didn't have it anymore. Liz was waiting for me at home. Sophie was still at a friend's place. I wrote to her asking her to stay there another night, without explaining why. Liz stood in the kitchen, wearing the same sweater she had worn back in Brooklyn when we were young and poor. She looked lost, but I didn't let myself soften. "Jim," she said as soon as I entered. "Where have you been?" I wrote. "I was walking," I answered, putting my bag on the table. My voice was even, like a doctor giving a diagnosis. "Thought." She stepped towards me. Her eyes were red. "Jim, forgive me. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to. Tell me what to do." I looked at her curls, at her hands, which I had held 1,000 times, and felt how everything inside was shrinking. But I've already decided. "Liz, I'm filing for divorce." She froze as if I had hit her. Then she shook her head, quickly, as if she could shake off my words. "No, Jim, wait. We can survive this. We've been through so much, Sophie, debts, everything. It was a mistake, one mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said quietly. "A mistake is forgetting your keys or being late for the train. And you took away from me what I held on to, trust." She covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders trembling. "Jim, please. I love you. I don't want him. I don't want anyone. It was stupidity, a moment of weakness. Don't destroy us over this." I sat down at the table, folded my hands in front of me. It hurt me to look at her, but I forced myself. "Liz, I believe that you love me. And I love you, I still do, damn it. But this cannot be changed. You stole my peace." She fell onto the chair opposite, tears streaming down her face, but she did not wipe them away. "Jim, we can go to a psychologist. We can talk. I'll do whatever you say. Don't leave me." I shook my head. "This is not about you, Liz. This is about me. I can't live with this. I can't pretend that everything is the same. You broke something, and I don't know how to fix it." She extended her hand across the table, but I didn't take it. She dropped her hand and sobbed. "And Sophie? What will happen to her?" "Sophie will stay with both of us," I said. "We'll figure it out. I won't take it away from you, but I can't be your husband." Silence hung between us, heavy, thick, louder than any scream. Liz looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I looked away. I didn't want to see her pain, not because I didn't care, but because it was tearing me apart. "Jim," she finally whispered, "are you sure? Is this the end?" I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. "Yes, I'll call the lawyer tomorrow." She covered her face with her hands and sobbed quietly, without hysteria, but so that I felt every sob. I got up and took my jacket. "I'll spend the night at Andrew's," I said. "Then I'll come back for my things." "Jim," her voice was hoarse, "don't go. Please. I need it," I said. "Sorry." I went out, leaving her in the kitchen. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold and stinging. I walked to the car, and every step felt like a blow in my chest. I didn't scream or swear, I didn't have the strength. There was only silence that screamed for me. 20 years ended not with a scandal, not with loud words, but like this, quietly, with her crying and the creaking of the door. I got into the car, started the engine, but didn't drive right away. I sat looking at our house, at the light in the window, at Liz's shadow, which was still there. I loved her. I still loved it. But after that, I could no longer be with her. The decision to divorce was made, but telling Sophie turned out to be more difficult than I thought. Sophie is 16, and she was our light, the one we went through hell and back for. Now that hell was back, not in the form of a disease, but in the form of a crack between us, Sophie found herself right in the middle. I didn't want to break her. I didn't want her to blame herself or us, but there was no choice. She had to know. I spent the night with Andrew, my university colleague, on his sagging sofa. He didn't ask any questions. He just poured me a glass of whiskey and said, "Jim, if anything happens, I'm here." In the morning, I returned home not to stay, but to talk to Sophie. Liz texted me that night. "She'll be back by dinner. Let's say it together." I agreed, even though I didn't want to see Liz. Her tears, her voice, it all still cut me like a knife. Sophie entered the house around noon, leaving her backpack at the door. Max ran up to her, wagging his tail, and she patted him on the head, not noticing the tension in the air. Liz and I were sitting in the living room, me on the sofa, she in the chair, the table between us like a barrier. Sophie looked at us and frowned. "What kind of faces?" she asked, sitting on the arm of the sofa. "Someone died?" I swallowed and looked at Liz. She nodded at me. "Go ahead." "Sophie," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "Mom and I need to tell you something. We're getting a divorce." Her eyes widened and she froze. "What?" she asked again, as if she hadn't heard. "This is a joke, right?" "No, baby," I said. "This is not a joke. We decided it would be better this way." She jumped up, her voice breaking into a scream. "Better? Are you serious? Why? What's happened?" Liz extended her hand, but Sophie recoiled. "Sophie, listen," Liz began. "This is not because of you. This is between me and Dad. We just can't be together anymore." "Not because of me?" Sophie looked at her, then at me. "Then why? You have always been. You are a team. What have you done?" I wanted to say something soothing, but the truth burned in my throat. Liz looked down, and I knew she wouldn't tell me. "Mom made a mistake," I said quietly, "and I can't forgive her." "That's it." Sophie turned to Liz, her face red with anger. "A mistake? What error? Are you with someone?" She stopped, her eyes filled with tears. "It's because of that festival, right? Because of this Ellington?" Liz winced but didn't answer. Her silence was louder than words. Sophie screamed. "Are you serious, Mom? You ruined everything because of some stupid actor. You betrayed us." "Sophie," Liz stood up, her voice trembling. "That's not true. I love you. I didn't mean to." "You didn't want to?" Sophie stepped back, almost tripping over Max. "I don't want to hear it. You ruined everything." She rushed towards me and hugged me so tightly that I felt her tears through my shirt. I hugged her back, stroked her back, but didn't say anything. There were no words. Liz stood looking at us, her arms hanging limply at her side. "Sophie, forgive me," she whispered. "Please." "No," Sophie snapped, pulling away from me. "I don't want to talk to you. I'm staying with Dad." She ran out of the room, slamming her bedroom door. Max whined, looking between me and Liz. I looked at her. She was crying, but did not move from her place. "Jim," she said quietly, "don't let her hate me. I can't stand this." "I won't tune it," I replied. "But she decides for herself, Liz. You made this choice, not me." She nodded and wiped her tears with her sleeve. "I know. Just take care of her." "Always," I said. "You are her mother, too. Don't forget." I went up to Sophie. She sat on the bed, hugging her knees, her face wet with tears. I sat down next to her and put my hand on her shoulder. "Baby," I said, "it's not your fault. And Mom, she still loves you." "She betrayed us, Dad," Sophie whispered. "How could she?" I sighed, feeling her pain mingling with mine. "I don't know, Sophie. Sometimes people make mistakes. But you don't have to choose between us. We're both here for you." "I don't want to see her," she said stubbornly. "I'll stay with you." "Okay," I nodded. "So far, so. But someday you'll have to talk to her." She buried herself in my shoulder, and I hugged her tighter. We sat for so long until the tears did not dry, and it did not get dark outside the window. Liz went into the bedroom. I heard her quietly close the door. Sophie was between us, bursting with anger and love, and I knew this was just the beginning. She blamed Liz, and I was just trying to keep both of us afloat. That night, I slept in the guest room, listening to Sophie snoring behind the wall. Liz stayed in our bedroom, what was once ours. We were under the same roof, but further apart than ever. And Sophie, our girl, was the one who felt it most. A week after I left my keys on the table and left my house in Queens, I rented an apartment in Manhattan. For the first time in 20 years, I lived alone without Liz, without Sophie, without Max, who stayed with them. The apartment was small, on the 6th floor of an old building near the university. One bedroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table, and a window overlooking the brick wall of the neighboring building. It didn't feel like home, but I told myself it was temporary, just a place to wait while I figured out who I was now. I moved a few things, a couple of boxes of books, clothes, an old laptop. I bought a cheap bed, assembled from a store, and spent the first night looking at the ceiling, listening to the noise of the city taxis, sirens, someone screaming in the distance. Queens was quiet at night, but here Manhattan reminded me that life goes on, even if mine has stopped. Sophie stayed with Liz. She still didn't want to talk to her mother, but I insisted that she not leave school and live where she was used to. I saw her on the weekends, and it was the only thing that kept me going. I greeted my first morning in my new apartment with coffee from a paper cup. I didn't have a coffee machine. I went to the university on foot, through the noisy streets, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not like Professor Carter, but just Jim, lonely, lost, but alive. My lectures became my refuge. I read about the Civil War, about battles and losses, and the students listened, not suspecting that I myself felt on the battlefield. One day, after class, Andrew Klein, my friend and colleague, the same one with whom I spent the night after leaving Liz, came up to me. He knocked on the table while I collected the papers. "Jim, you look like a ghost," he said, adjusting his glasses. "How much sleep did you have this week?" 5 hours. I shrugged. Approximately. New apartment, new sounds. I'm getting used to it. He frowned. "You don't get used to it, you survive. Let's go have a beer. Right now." "I still have an essay to check," I objected, but he shook his head. "The essay will wait." "But you don't." We went to a bar near Campus Dark, with wooden tables and the smell of frying wings. Andrew ordered 2 beers, and we sat in the corner. He looked at me as I twirled the bottle in my hands. "Well," he said finally, "how are you, Jim?" "In fact." I sighed and took a sip. "I don't know, Andrew. Empty. I thought it would be easier to leave and start again. But unfortunately, the reality is much harder." He nodded without interrupting. "And Sophie. Sophie comes with me on weekends," I said. "She's mad at Liz, but I'm trying to soften her up. I don't want her to hate her mother." "You're a good father," Andrew said, "and a good husband." I smiled bitterly. Ex-husband. And apparently not such a good one, since she went to this Ellington. "Don't blame yourself," he said firmly. "It's her choice, not yours. You did what you could." "Maybe," I said, looking into the bottle. "But I still think, what if I had been more attentive? If you had noticed earlier?" Andrew patted me on the shoulder. "Jim, you are not clairvoyant. You were with her for 20 years. It was she who broke everything, not you." I nodded, but his words did not remove the weight from my chest. We finished our beer, talked about work. He talked about his new graduate student who confused Lincoln with Washington, and I even smiled. Andrew was right, I was surviving, but maybe this was the beginning. At home, if this apartment can be called, that I immersed myself in work. I was writing a book that I had put off for years, about ordinary people in the Civil War, not generals, but farmers and workers whose lives were torn in half. It took my mind off Liz. Sophie came over on Saturdays, and we tried to stay the same as before, making pizza, watching old movies, hanging out with Max, whom she brought with her. One day she said, "Dad, your apartment is strange. It smells of books and loneliness." I laughed. "This is my new style, Sophie. Professorial chic." "Chic," she snorted. "More like professorial melancholy. When will you get a sofa?" "Soon," I promised, "and maybe even a dog." She smiled, but then became serious. "Mom asks about you. All the time." I froze, holding a piece of pizza. "And what are you telling her?" "That you're okay," she said. "But she's not okay, Dad. Cries sometimes." I nodded, feeling a pang in my chest. "It's hard for her, Sophie. It's hard for all of us. But you don't have to save her. It's not your job." "I know," she said quietly. "It's just, I miss the way it was." "Me too, baby," I said, hugging her. "Me too." My new world was quiet, lonely, but I learned to live in it. Lectures, a book, Sophie on weekends, this became my anchor. Liz called a couple of times, asked about documents, about Sophie, but I answered briefly, without emotion. Her voice was still cutting, but I didn't show it. I didn't know who I would become without her, but I knew I had to move on for Sophie's sake, for my own sake. And step by step, this new world began to take shape. It's been 3 months since I left my home in Queens and moved into my Manhattan apartment. I was getting used to the loneliness, to the silence of my new reality, where there was neither Liz, nor her laughter, nor her habit of singing Sinatra while cooking dinner. But I couldn't help but think about her, not about the Liz who destroyed our marriage, but about the one who continued to live. About how she copes, how she breathes in a world that she herself has turned upside down. I didn't see her every day, I didn't talk to her, except for occasional calls about Sophie or documents, but through our daughter, through the fragments of her life that reached me, I began to understand that her path now is a separate story, and I will tell it as I see it, even if it hurts. The first thing I noticed was how her voice changed. When she called to discuss Sophie's schedule or drop off some paperwork, he no longer had that spark, that enthusiasm that I had loved since college. He became quieter, heavier, as if every word was pulling her down. One day, in early April, she called in the evening. I was in my apartment, sitting at the table with the next chapter of a book about the Civil War. The phone vibrated, and I saw her name on the screen. I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Hi, Liz," I said, putting down my pen. "Hi, Jim," she replied. Pause. "Are you visiting Sophie this weekend?" "Yes," I said. "She will arrive on Saturday morning. Do you need anything?" "No, it's just." She hesitated. I wanted to make sure. "She barely talks to me, Jim. I don't know what to do." I pressed my lips together, feeling the old pain stirring inside me. "She's angry, Liz. She needs time." "How much time?" she asked, and her voice trembled. 3 months have passed, and she looks at me like I'm a stranger. "I can't lose her, Jim." "You won't lose her," I said, although I wasn't sure. "She loves you. Just let her figure it out on her own." "And you?" she asked quietly. "Do you understand too?" I fell silent. What could I say? What do I think about her every day? That I hate myself for still loving her. Instead, I replied, "I live, Liz. That's all I can do now." She sighed. "Okay, thank you for taking Sophie. Good night, Jim." "Good night," I said, and hung up. This conversation was one of many short, tense, like a string that was about to break. But through Sophie, I learned more. One Saturday, we were sitting on my new couch. I had finally bought some furniture, eating pizza and watching some stupid movie. Sophie suddenly said, "Mom has been strange lately." I put the piece down and looked at her. "Strange? How?" "I don't know," she shrugged. "She's at home all the time, but it's as if she's not there. He sits in his room, writes something, and then vomits, and cries. I heard it at night." I nodded, feeling a pang in my chest. "It's hard for her, Sophie. Divorce is not just for you and me." "I don't care," she said sharply. "She ruined everything. Why should I feel sorry for her?" "You shouldn't," I said. "But she's your mother, and she will not stop being her." Sophie snorted but remained silent. I didn't push. She was a teenager, angry, confused, and I knew that her anger towards Liz would eventually subside. But the words about Liz crying and tearing up her notes stuck in my head. I imagined her in our house, now her house, sitting at the table where we ate pizza on Fridays, with a pencil in her hands and emptiness in her eyes. And I hurt for her, even though I didn't want to admit it. A couple of weeks later, I accidentally found out more. Andrew, my friend from university, came to my office with a newspaper, the latest issue of the New York Times. He threw it on the table and said, "Did you see this?" I took the newspaper and opened it to the culture section. There was Liz's column, not like before, full of life and wit, but dark, almost personal. She wrote about the theater, about a play about betrayal and forgiveness that she saw on Broadway. But between the lines there was something else. Sometimes we break what we love, not because we want to, but because we see no other way. And then we live with the wreckage, trying to put it back together, but it doesn't add up anymore. I read it twice, feeling the words cutting me inside. "Is this about you?" Andrew asked, looking at me over his glasses. "I don't know," I lied. maybe just about the play. Jim, I'm not stupid, he said. She writes as if she is confessing. Have you talked to her about this? No, I said, closing the newspaper, and I'm not going to. He sighed, but didn't argue. I left the newspaper on the table, but all day my thoughts returned to it. Liz always wrote like this. She put herself into every line. Previously, it was dreams, humor, stories about people. Now pain, guilt, debris. I didn't want to read her columns, but I couldn't stop. It was the only window into her world that I had left. Sophie told me something else a month later. Max and I were walking in Central Park. I took the day off to spend the day with her. She threw the ball to the dog and then said, Mom went to see some friends. Marge, I think. They were yelling at each other. I raised an eyebrow. Marge? Her editor? Yeah, Sophie nodded. I heard my mother screaming on the phone that she didn't want to write about any stars anymore, and Marge was screaming that she was losing her grip. Then Mom threw the phone on the sofa and went to her room. And what next? I asked, watching Max rush after the ball. Nothing, Sophie said. She works less now, sitting at home, looking out the window. Sometimes he asks about you. I nodded, feeling a familiar weight fall on my shoulders. Marge Wilson had been Liz's friend since her first articles, a strict but fair woman who always pushed Liz forward. If they fought, then Liz is really losing herself. I imagined her in our house alone, with empty pages, with a feeling of guilt that she could not throw out. And I felt sorry for her, even though I didn't want it. One day, I ran into her by chance in a supermarket in Queens, where I stopped to buy groceries for Sophie. She stood at the coffee shelf, wearing an old coat. I froze, not knowing whether to leave or approach. She noticed me first, her eyes widened. Jim, she said, clutching a pack of coffee in her hands. Hello. Hi, Liz, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. How are you? Fine, she lied. I saw it in her face, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. And you? I'm living, I said. Sophie said you sit at home a lot. She looked down. Yes, I took a break from work. After everything, I can't write like I used to. I understand, I said, although I wasn't sure I understood. You always wrote better than anyone. She smiled weakly, almost painfully. Thank you, Jim. Are you okay? In Manhattan? I'm getting used to it, I said. I'm working, I see, Sophie. Everything is fine. Okay, she nodded. I'm glad you have Sophie. We stood in silence, awkwardness hanging between us. I noticed that she had lost weight, that her hands were shaking when she put the coffee in the basket. Liz, I said, not knowing why, take care of yourself, for Sophie's sake. She looked at me, her eyes sparkling. I'm trying, Jim. Is it true? I nodded, turned, and went to the cash register. When I looked back, she was still standing by the shelf, looking after me. This meeting stayed with me for a long time, not because we talked, but because I saw her drowning, and I couldn't save her. Through Sophie, I learned that Liz had started seeing a psychologist. It was in May Sophie came to me with a backpack and said, Mom is now talking to some aunt. He sits with her for an hour, then comes home and is silent. That's good, I said, putting the kettle on. She needs to talk to someone. Maybe, Sophie muttered, but she's still sad, and asks if you will ever forgive her. I froze, holding the mug. And what did you say? I don't know, she answered. Will you forgive me, Dad? I put the mug on the table and sat down opposite her. Sophie, I don't know. I don't hate her. But to forgive, that's different. She nodded, looking at the floor. I don't know either. Sometimes I want to hug her, and sometimes I want to scream. It's normal, I said. You don't have to decide right now. She looked up, and I saw in them the same pain that I had. We drank tea in silence, and I thought about Liz, about how she was sitting with a psychologist, trying to clean up what she had done. I didn't know if it would help her, but I hoped it would, for Sophie's sake. Sophie said that Liz left the editorial office, not completely quit, but took an indefinite leave of absence. Instead, she began to write something of her own, not for the newspaper, but for herself. Sophie found a stack of handwritten sheets in her room, but Liz hid them when she noticed. It was some kind of story, Sophie said when we were walking with Max, about a woman who lost everything. I read a couple of lines until she took it away. Maybe this is her way of coping, I said. She always wrote to understand herself. Maybe, Sophie agreed, but she doesn't want me to see. She said that this is not for prying eyes. One day I received a letter from her, a real one, paper, in an envelope. It was in June. I found it in the mailbox of my apartment. She probably knew my address from Sophie. I sat down at the table, opened it, feeling my heart beating. Her handwriting was the same, sweeping, slightly uneven. Jim, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to write. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I have no right. I just want to say that I live every day with what I did. It's no excuse, but that night, it was a mistake that I can't explain. I lost you, almost lost Sophie, and now I'm trying to figure out who I am without you. I go to a psychologist. I write not for the newspaper, but so as not to go crazy. Sophie said you're okay, and I'm glad. I really am. You have always been stronger than me. I'm not asking to come back. I'm not asking for anything. Just know that I love you both, even if it means nothing now. Take care, Jim and Sophie. Liz. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it and put it in my desk drawer. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Her words were sincere, but they could not take away the pain. They could not restore trust. I sat in my small apartment, listened to the noise of Manhattan, and thought about her path, lonely, difficult, full of guilt. She was trying to find herself, just as I was trying to find myself here. But our paths diverged, and it was irreversible. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to